Greetings and salutations. Welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. Before we begin, as always, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi. Tell us what you'd like us to talk about as far as future episodes go, and share this video with a friend. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. My guest today is a playwright, director, and actor based out of Los Angeles. He received his BFA at the conservatory at Webster University and is a company member at both the Great River Shakespeare Festival in Minnesota and the Ensemble Shakespeare Theatre in Pasadena, California. His play Future Tripping received its world premiere this year at the LOFT Ensemble in Los Angeles. His play Is Not That Strange was a finalist in Screencraft's 2020 stage play competition. Other plays include One Way Trip and Pilgrim. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brian Gene White.
Hi.
Hello there, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks. What an intro.
You appreciate
do your research.
Well, you know, you've got some work out there, and it was quite easy to research.
Well, that's good.
So let's talk about this whole process about the world premiere. Like, let's go from how we started. We'll get into the history of where you started as well, but let's just go through this initial process of like where the idea came from start to finish, and then the rewriting process, the editing, how you went about it, and then when it finally got to the LOFT and how you got it to the LOFT, I should say.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Let's start from the very beginning because it's a very good place to start. I also like looking at for everybody who's not seeing all the books behind you, because it's all the playwriting and acting and all the thing books that it's like I just love it. So Future Tripping is a play. I'll start with so people know what I'm talking about.
Please.
It's a two-hander, kind of a three-hander, but two-hander. It's about somebody who accidentally murders themselves as a time traveler. The idea came about during quarantine. And it came out when I was by myself. My partner, she was in New Jersey taking care of some family stuff. There was a family illness, so I was kind of all alone. And Animaniacs came on, and Pinky and the Brain helped inspire this play. So it was like a Sunday night. I had the idea of like, well, has that ever happened before? Has anybody ever murdered their future self? And I did kind of what my process is. I kind of did I started. My initial outline is always kind of the Pixar 6 questions of or not questions, but the once upon a time, every day, until one day, and because of that, until finally. And it's just a real simple way for me to get an idea of what the scope is.
Do you actually have those actual questions broken down? Like, Can you actually, for those that don't know exactly what they are, can you actually go through those?
That was it. They're actually not questions. I'm sorry. It's more of a... for Future Tripping. So those are the 6 things, though. And it's not just Pixar that does it. It's other people that do it as well. I think I forgot where they got it from, but right now it's really attributed to them. And a lot of times they'll do Finding Nemo. Of like, once upon a time, there was a fish, and he had a kidfish, and he took care of it. The kidfish had a fin that didn't work as well. Every day they would go to school, but he was incredibly worried about all these things. Until one day, Nemo, the kidfish, gets lost. Because of that, Dad had to go find his kid. Because of that, he meets all these fish in the ocean until finally they're reunited. Simple skeleton breakdown. What does somebody want? Because I write from character, and because I'm an actor also, a lot of times it becomes improv writing of like, okay, what does this character want? I never want to write a character that I wouldn't want to play. I never want to write a character that I would get tired of playing after a 3-week run or something like that. I want to make sure. So I used to kind of just improv write, and then I just write myself in the corners because I didn't quite know where I was going. So by giving myself that, I know they're, plotters and pantsers. Like the people just fly by the seat of their pants.
That's me.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
You're like, all right, I'm jiving in. And then there are plotters who do the whole, I'm going to outline every beat, every moment. You'll see a lot of this more in film, too, of what is that? What is every little individual moment? And on plays, I kind of go in between. I find I can complete plays more when I give myself that this is the ending point. Or not even the ending point, but this is their journey. I don't know how it's going to end usually. So I wrote that in a week, that play in a week, because
Because you had time.
Because I had time, but it was right before Thanksgiving. So I had it like the Sunday before Thanksgiving. I was by myself. I called my friend who actually ended up being the lead in it. Her name is Heather Schmidt. She's incredibly talented. And if you find her and you see her audition for you, you should hire her immediately. And I said, is this a thing? Because when I was writing it, I was thinking about me playing that part. And somebody like me isn't always the most interesting person to play these parts. And that's kind of... So I take that step back and go, okay, what if Heather played this part? And I called her and I said, is that a thing? And I didn't want it to be about almost a parable or a science fiction Vonnegut thing about suicide, but that's what it kept kind of leaning towards, about attempted suicide and not leaving before the miracle happens. What happens if you are given this opportunity to see that? And she said, well, yeah, it needs to be about that. If that's what you're afraid of, that's what it needs to be about. And I called my other friend, Michael, who ended up being both these actors are people I trust, people I've worked with a lot. I did Hamlet with both of them. I've worked with Michael for years. I've worked with Heather for years. So being able to just say, I'm writing this. If I have something, do you want to read it? And there are also two people that I trust that will tell me. I can tell during the reading if it's working or not because of their reaction. They're both such talented actors that actors will always let me know if it's working or if it's not. If it's, because I don't know if you have this feeling, where do you ever get this idea that people aren't telling you the truth about your work?
I think that's LA.
Okay.
I really, I think that's what you experience most of the time. I don't think you're getting a real genuine response. Not to mention, I've also heard it from friends that you don't give that honest response right in the beginning of the run.
Yeah.
Like wait till the run's over and then talk about it. Yeah. But I still don't think that people do that. I'm nervous about anything that I produce. I always still feel like it was lacking somewhere that people, it's just one of those things. So, and as far as my writing goes, that's a totally separate thing. I just finished my first draft of a full length, and I'm nervous about where it's going to go now. And I haven't even read it yet to make sure that it's cohesive or anything like that. So that's my take on that. But I do agree with you. I think that LA mostly is that it's that kind of town. That's nobody's genuine or authentic.
Well, the good news is I have these people in my corner who are genuine and authentic.
Good.
And I love and adore them very much. And if it wasn't something, they would tell me. So on Thanksgiving in the morning, because once again, COVID, we weren't with people. We read the first. I asked them originally to do the first 20 pages. The night before, I wrote another 20, so we were at 40 pages. And it also, if that sounds like a lot, with this play, it's two people, and a lot of it is quick back and forth dialogue. So some of these pages were quick; they were breezing by. So for anybody who's like 20 pages, if like you were looking at a film script, it would also be a little shorter with that.
Right.
And we read it, and they were both like, yeah, this is, when can we do this? And that's always the moment I know it's a thing. I can do that, I can do the reading, I can play around a little bit, but until I have the people that I'm also starting to write something for, is for me when it starts to take off. So I finished it. We did a couple of readings for, you mentioned Great River in the intro. They were doing a play reading series, and I just asked, just contemporary plays, I asked if we could throw it in there. Got lots of notes from them. I'm a part of a writer's group, got some more notes from them that meets on Monday nights. Did some rewrites, did another read, and then we kind of put it in a drawer for a little bit. We said we were going to do it. But then Michael got work. The world started to open up again. So we were talking about doing like a spring of 2021. Michael got work, thank goodness. He had to go away for a while. And thankfully it did, because we were trying to get, and it was the first time that I said, I'm writing plays. Let's do it. Let's get it up there. And there were enough people that started to support me. Kelly Lozo and CJ Merriman came on as producers, and they're people that I know very well, and Heather and Michael were a part of it, a big part of this process. And when you said Loft, I want to make sure also that we're clear on this, that we rented Loft's upstairs space.
Okay.
Loft had their own season, but they were instrumental, and they were so supportive. They came and saw it. They were big believers and champions in that. And CJ knows them very well. He's worked there a lot of times, so there is that connection there. So in that initial planning process, that's also when we learned there was so much that we didn't quite know yet. Producing, these are some of the things, if you're producing a play in LA, that I wish people would have told me ahead of time. Get as good of a marketing person as you possibly can to come in. Because if nobody knows who you are and nobody knows the play, it's not that nobody knows the play, it's going to be hard to get people in. And we kind of used as much of our resources as we could, and CG was great at getting people out there and getting an audience. And we sold out. Our final weekend, we sold out every night. We had great word of mouth. But you kind of wish those earlier days were a little more full.
Well, you also have to, you're also dealing with an interesting time where things haven't really quite reopened either, 100%. Where some people are still a little nervous about, going out and being in so.
Yeah. And we did mask policies, we did all that, but we also knew there were a couple people in particular who said, if you're filming it, tell me, and I will watch it on film, but I can't take that risk, nor should they. And we were so lucky. We got through that we took huge COVID protocols. We rehearsed outside because Michael has a big backyard and it's California. We couldn't do that in New York. We couldn't rehearse outside. So we had those things that were working. We incredibly, that was the thing that we toasted at the end. We toasted that nobody got sick during our run. We took care of everybody. We took care of our audience. We wanted everybody to know they were in good hands when they were coming through. I think I got sidetracked here in the story, but
no, that's fine, because there's lots of questions that I wanted to bring up, because you brought up a few things. But what was some of the rewriting? Where did you find issues lied? Where did issues lie? 2 people on stage is hard. 2 people on stage for almost the whole time is difficult to continue to create conflict. I did find that I had to bring in a third character, and I had to bring in a third character in Act 2. So initially, I just had this one character come in, this detective, that kind of changed the whole way the path was going. You think it's going to be very happy, and then a cop comes on. You're like, oh, no. Because there's been a dead body. There's this kind of trouble with Harry thing where they're like trying to move the body and grotesque humor. So there was that. That changed kind of the way I had to look at it. I was like, okay, so we're going to have to bring a third actor in. Well, that third actor can look like Heather, who can look like the lead actress. So that'll make a nice little moment coming earlier in the play where we see her accidentally shoot herself, which is easier to do in film, not as easy to do on stage. So I was like, okay, so that actor can do both things. So that gives them more to do than just have to sit backstage. And then as I was doing rewrites, we did another reading at Great River, and and the great actors up there. I was like, man, they just need something else. It's the same thing. It's like, I don't want to be sitting there for 2 hours a night and just have to come on for 5 minutes, particularly if I'm not getting paid like Guthrie level or things like that. So I just added a scene earlier that for her, and it helped the play, and it made one of Dad's monologues not so exposition-y. Because when you're at 2 people in a room and you're trying to get these things, and it's all dialogue, you're trying to show, not tell, like we always like to talk about. And with exposition, backstory, particularly if you're just diving right in, the door opens up in this play and she's dragging a dead body in. It's like there's no time. We hit the ground in the middle, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But then you got to make, why have they been apart this long? What's going on there? And I had him tell this whole story, and every time we read it, somebody was like, he's good, he's delivering it really well, but it's just it just feels like you have it in there so we know why he went to jail. I'm like, okay. So by being able to turn it into a scene, which we've been doing with other stuff, it changed the whole, it gave the actor something else to do. It took away a long story monologue that probably wasn't as well written. It sped up the play. It gave us a sense of leaving the claustrophobic cabin a little bit, brief respite, but also when we came back, anytime that actor, the third actor came on, the play changed completely. And so that was a big thing that I learned working on this. Giving the actor something to do, make sure it is in service of the play, making sure that it is not just... making sure it is not just a storytelling monologue for the sake of a storytelling monologue. No matter how good of an actor you've got, stories have to do something, right? You want something. There has to be a reason you're doing it. And Michael is very good, and he can make anything work. But I think it was just better that it became a scene. So that was a big change that we had in these readings. Some of the other changes that happened with rewriting was really finding out. It's the trimming, right? Not every joke that I write down is a good joke. And to be able to also trust the actors to give it a shot and give it multiple shots. Because also, if as an actor, and if I've got your script and I do a joke and I think I don't deliver it well and you cut it right after, I think it's my fault. And to be a writer and be like, it's not your fault. It's just not that funny of a joke. We're going to cut it from this point forward to make it better. So any actors who are watching this, it's not your fault.
Let them off the hook.
Yeah.
You mentioned obstacles in the production thing that you weren't aware of, that you wish people had told you. What are some of those other things that you experienced that we've talked about self-producing in past episodes, and so these are things that we really haven't gotten into. We just talked about whether or not you should, but we didn't talk about whether or not, or what the obstacles are and how to overcome them, or what are some of the things that you wish that somebody told you, and how did you guys overcome those?
Yeah. What was the conclusion? Have you all come up with that you should or you shouldn't? Or
no, I think well, here's the thing. This is where it goes back to with everything else especially in this town. I think it depends on where you're at. I come from the mindset is quit waiting for somebody else to give you permission to do what you want to do.
100%.
And that doesn't come from just playwriting. That comes from acting as well. If at least film and television aside, because you only have so much control over that. You can maybe shoot your own short film or maybe even feature if you can, figure out a way to do the budget. But if there's a role you want to play and you've auditioned for that role a zillion times, and you keep getting told no, then go buy the rights to that play, stage it yourself, find yourself somebody to direct you, and get a theater and play that role. Yeah. If that's truly what you want to do. So that's my mindset. Yes, go ahead. If you have sent it out but you really believe in this piece, then stage it yourself. Go get a theater. It's more accessible. I think producing theater is more accessible than people realize. I think it's intimidating.
Yes.
But once you start the process, I think that you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said, and that's actually how I started writing again. Is I started adapting. I kept wanting to write stuff, and I kept putting Hamlet in it. Like I kept putting Hamlet lines, Hamlet moments, and all these things. Because when I was an apprentice at Great River at the Shakespeare Festival, I was cast as Hamlet in their apprentice show. But then family things happened, and I made the choice to leave to go be with somebody as they were passing away. And it just stuck in my head the whole time. But then as I was writing all this other stuff, I kept coming back to this. I was like, well, why am I writing this? Why don't I just cut down Hamlet? That's the story I'm telling. Why not just do that? And it'd been with me, and it was and same thing, where Ensemble Shakespeare Theatre here in Pasadena, I know the artistic director, Brian. He's also Brian. So many Brians in theater in L.A.,
it's a Brian town.
It's a Brian town, I tell you. And we talked about it, and same thing. He directed it, and we talked, and he always talks about why. Why are we doing this? Why are we choosing this play? And that moment when we were talking about it and connected, I was grateful that he was like, yes, I'm in 100%. So with that, with back to writing and producing my own our stuff, this was one I didn't send out because at the beginning of 2020, a friend of mine, another Brian, wow, all the Brians, I swear, I just collect Brians. As a Brian, I collect all the Brians. Another great Brian, he and I were going to produce it. He was going to direct it in New York. And once again, I had actors in mind that I kind of wrote it for, and we were going to, and we had good connections out there. And then 2020 happened. So it was kind of that, my friend described it the other day as like, you're climbing up Everest and then you have to get airlifted back. And then you want to try to reclimb it again. And you get frustrated with how, and this guy, Brandon Ford, just nailed it on the head with this explanation of it. And I just didn't want to try to go through that again. So I was like, I'm going to do it myself. Rather than try to get it out there and COVID and everything. I know these people. I can raise, I've been saving up some money. I want to, and I'll direct it. And because also trying to minimize the amount of people that were going to be involved in a COVID world. Now, where that comes from, because we also wanted to make sure that we were taking care of everybody financially. I didn't want it to just be just a vanity project. I wanted to make sure that everybody had investment, but also everybody. And when you're doing independent theater in LA, you never can pay anybody as much as everybody deserves. But we paid everybody more than minimum wage. We paid everybody more than what we were.
That's generous.
Yeah, but also because you just got to take care of people. I've seen too much abuse kind of from that stuff and people putting everything into it. So that's, and our actors, our designers, everybody. And one of the other things that I would say with that is have a TD almost before you do anything else. Because we had to
That's
design
technical director.
Technical
director. For those that may not be familiar with the lingo.
Apologies. Yes.
No, not at all.
No. Technical director. Have a technical director early on. That's something that our co-producer CJ would say too. That was our big thing where we were scrambling. We had a great design. We just didn't know how we were going to build the set. So that was something, and we got one eventually, and he was great. And his name is Mitch. He's awesome. He works with LOFT. So LOFT, it kind of almost became, there's so many people with LOFT that were a part of our show, that it was just fantastic. We thank them for their support. So Mitch, and then we had great lighting designers. Actually, the only person who did get sick was our lighting designer. It was my friend Martha, but she got sick the day she was going to come in. She hadn't been around anybody. Once again, the technical director of LOFT said, they saw the look on our faces, and he kind of came in and said, I can do it. Did it that day. Some of the
very nice,
kindest, most generous, amazing artists that you can meet are at LOFT Ensemble here in North Hollywood. Some other things I would, Fractured Atlas is a great way to raise money. A lot of times people use GoFundMe and things like that. Talk to me about
the Fractured Atlas. Let's hear about this. This is the first time I've heard of it. So
Fractured Atlas will fiscally sponsor your show or whatever artistic endeavor you're doing. There are all these different ones that will support you, but you have to get the money. You have to raise enough money in order to get the money. Fractured Atlas isn't that. So if you're raising money and you only raise $200, it's your $200. You're not the LLC, you're not the nonprofit, but they are supporting you. So the donations go to them, which make them tax deductible for everybody as well, which was the biggest thing that we found. You can still do, if you donate this amount of money, you get posters, you did this amount of money, but the people are also so great at being able to communicate and talk to you and kind of let you know if you have any problems and jump through any hoops. Yeah.
Do they do, because I've heard of this, for lack of a better word, loophole as well, yeah, where somebody, like for me, Punk Monkey Productions is an LLC. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to go the
501.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what are they? Gosh, we just
nonprofit.
The nonprofit route.
Yeah, have a board of directors, all the things.
Yeah, somebody, an artistic director that I spoke with, who does have a 501c3, he asked, "Why do you want to give up control of your company?" Good point. All right, fair enough. So I kind of had to take a step back. But that being said, that there are groups out there that will say, look, especially when it comes to grant writing or sponsorship.
Yes.
You are not going to get that stuff unless you're, a nonprofit.
Yeah.
So some nonprofits will be your nonprofit in order to receive the grants. They'll represent you in that regard and maybe take a portion. So
that's what Fractured Atlas really does. Is they are a 501c that will fiscally sponsor. You'll essentially have an account connected to it. All the money goes through there. They check the money also to make sure that everything is like official before you can put it into your account. So like if you're going to request money from them, you have to give them like a couple days heads up, and then they'll put it over into your account. One of the best things, but independently producing a show without a theater, without a lot of these connections, is harder than if you're getting LOFT or Sacred Fools or any of these kind of LA theaters around here, just because of the network of connections that they have.
Right.
So we had a lot of good people, and we had a lot of people who were connected and knew a lot of people. So our audience was full, but we kind of reached the end of our audience by the end of it too, without having this outside push.
What was the marketing aspect that you had brought up marketing earlier in the conversation? And so how did you approach that? What did you do marketing wise that got the butts in the seats by the end?
Yeah, a lot of word of mouth. I'm a big believer that posting something on Instagram or Facebook is fine. Sending a message to people directly and being like, no, I'm serious. This is something I want you to come see. I know we're always doing stuff, but please come see this. We're very proud of this. So that's number one. You're going to get 20% of your audience that way. CJ was fantastic at this because she was like a terrier, like just constantly trying to scrounge up people to come. CJ's been working LA theater for a while, and she just knows enough people that have contact lists. So she was just emailing and sending out, and there's like this window when you're producing a show to get reviewers and people to come see you. That's like, it's not 6 weeks out, but it's not a month out. It's like 4 days in between. Otherwise, they're going to be booked from seeing all the other shows during that time. So she was kind of threading that needle. So we were getting, we would reach out to other theaters that we've worked at, try to get them to talk about it. We had posters that we posted. I love the poster. I'm a little biased, though. I made the poster. It's like the best thing I've ever done on Photoshop.
Congratulations, because I can't do a thing on that thing.
Couldn't do it again. I couldn't do it again. It was just kind of a freak out. I think I was doing it when I didn't want to do a rewrite.
When we post this, send me that, and I'll do a little insert in there for the visual watchers, opposed to the ones listening. I'm sorry that you'll have to go to the YouTube channel to see what the poster looks like.
Yes. Well, I'll describe. It's a tea kettle, which has a big thing to do with the show, and it was in black and white. Yeah, so our marketing was really, we joined, was it Better Lemons or Bitter Lemons?
I've done stuff with them. They've gone through some transition. It was Bitter Lemons, and then it went to Better Lemons, and I don't know where they're at right now. Yeah. As far as, I did a review, a critic panel with them at some point, like 2018, 2019.
I think they're Better Lemons now.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. And it also helped that we were at Loft Space while Loft was doing another show. So people would come, they would see our stuff, and then come up and buy tickets. The main thing that we did, because also we were doing Fractured Atlas, and because we were going through equity, and it was a showcase, tickets were all by donation, which I honestly think is one of the best ways to do that right now, particularly here in LA with smaller theater. You will get people that pay you $5, but then you're going to get that overly generous patron that gives $80 for their one ticket. And in the grand scheme of things, it really does work out. I never want somebody to not be able to afford to see one of my plays. But that was one of the big things too that helped out with it.
Were you using a ticket platform for donations, or was this always at the door?
What were we using? We used our website. We also made the website, futuretrippingplay.com. It's still up if you want to see it. And you could reserve, so you didn't have to pay. You would reserve your space. You put your information in there. It'd immediately go to a Google Drive, a Google Sheet. So anybody who was working house manager would have all the information right there. And then we would also say, thank you for your reservation. This is a suggested donation. If you'd like to make a donation, click here and it'd take you to Fractured Atlas. Or we had a QR code at the door that people could scan. And some people were just like, here's $20. Just cash handed over to you.
What was your suggested donation?
Our suggested donation, I think, was 15. Yeah. I mean, 15, 20. It was also, yeah, we had enough of we weren't banking on that. Like we knew it would give us a little bit of cash to kind of help people out. But this was I don't know, you talk about producing your own stuff. You can't, when you're doing your ask to people in your network, that was my big thing of like, okay, this is the big ask to people right now. And I tried to focus here in LA of like, okay, because this is something that you'll be able to come see. But then there were people around the country who wanted to see it and started to donate money too. We did very well. We did great with our donation of our networks. So everybody kind of was like, hey, but you can't sustain something with that. You can't run a theater company of just hitting the same 50 people over and over again. This was a one-time only. What we were able to do with that, we worked out with the union and we worked out with everything, is we were able to use some of that money. We got a great videographer, and they did like a 4K streaming production of it. And we got it cleared with the union that it could be up for a week, that people could pay and watch it no matter where they were in the world. And it was a great view of it. And it was actually one of the best. Like, I used to hate streaming versions of plays. This one was pretty good. There's still part of me that I want to be in the room with the people, but it was a good translation.
100%. Yeah, we talked about it's Gregory Crafts out of Next Stage.
Okay.
He's got I think a 3 or 4 camera setup at his space with some halfway decent sound, and it sounds like they do a halfway decent streaming. Where I'm right there with you. I'm just like, usually the sound's terrible, or it's a static camera from a distance, and usually it's it sounds echoey because there's no mics on stage, nobody's mic'd and stuff like that. So it's starting to come around, but I don't know if I'm convinced quite yet.
I will say what was so great about him, and I apologize, I'm looking him up because I want to give him a shout out on this because he is so good. He does a lot of work here, but he had mics above the stage. He had, by using the 4K camera, he could keep the shot very still, but then he could zoom in and post on some of the more...
Sure.
And because it wasn't a big space to begin with, we were able to, like, it was the best one to do it with. I will find it after and I'll send it to you later because we can have to go through all of this while we're
no worries. We can always add it in the show notes at the bottom.
Yeah.
How was it? This is more of a producing aspect than it is playwriting. Yeah. So how was the process of going through equity?
It was good. That's something I wish we'd reached out earlier.
Is that just because the process took longer than what you expected and you were under pressure, or?
It's just hard to get people emails. It's just hard. When you're doing email and back and forth, sometimes it's hard to, and you've got holidays and things like that, and people are coming back from the new year. It was kind of a tag of back and forth and things like that. Have insurance. If you're producing your own stuff, make sure that you have the insurance ahead of time. There are certain companies that'll give you I think it just costs you $500, but it covers everybody. Volunteer insurance. There are a couple places that I'm not sure but you can reach out and that's always something people forget. Sometimes space will cover that for you.
Yeah, I know that when we produced the Actors Workout Studio, we were covered under their insurance for the most part. So
yeah, so some places will have that. Some people, so early on, check that out. Equity was great because they want actors to work. They want, and our Michael, who was the co-producer, it also helps that he was a producer and was able to talk to them, and it worked well for this production. But the thing is, you can't do another showcase of this show for at least a year, I think, is part of the rule too. So if we were to do it again, if we were to remount it, and we still have furniture and stuff in a storage unit, it would need to be a higher level and a higher code, which then also adds some other issues and more fundraising and things like that. So,
were there any other obstacles that you ran into working with Equity, or?
The main thing that I liked with Equity, because I am also a member of Actors Equity, is it's run by actors, and that is both good because they want you to work, and sometimes that's bad. I'm not always the most organized person. Sometimes I don't get back to emails and things like that. But our experience with them actually went pretty well. And also when we were talking about the taping of it and the filming of it, that was a good one. That once again, they were working with us. They tried to make sure that we knew everything up front. I just personally wish that we had gotten in touch with them earlier, but it was one of those things where I wish we had so much time when we knew we were going to do it. And it wasn't until we really brought Kelly in. So CJ and Michael and Heather and I are actors and writers, and we're artists. And Kelly is an artist too, but she's also lives more in the nonprofit and the business side of things. So when she came in, she's a project manager and was like, we're going to organize and we're going to get everything in this order, in this order, in this order, in this order. And it immediately cleared everything up. And we're just very grateful for her. So also, if you're producing your own thing, get somebody who knows that just a little bit better than you do. Don't let that deter you if you don't have anybody in your life who isn't a business or any kind of producer like that. But it does make things a lot better. And also, she's just brilliant. All of them were brilliant. Like I'm so grateful for this. When we talk about this, now I'm lighting up. I'm getting because I think about this team. We've kind of talked about problems and things like that. This was the perfect team for this show, for this production. Our assistant director, M. Perkins, was also our ASM because she wanted to be involved. But she was so brilliant and brought so many great ideas, and we would carpool because she lives in North Hollywood too, and we would drive back and forth and we would discuss it. Our stage manager, Silas, was fantastic. All of our designers, Atria and Ali, were our set and props designers, but they were both graduating from UC Irvine. Brilliant minds, and also how to make things quickly and just work tirelessly, and brought so many great ideas to the show. They were recommended by a colleague I used to work for who teaches there. The cast was amazing. Amalia played our third actor and was just such a big part of this process and wanted to make sure everybody succeeded. And I feel like I'm at the Oscars now and I'm just thanking everybody, but we couldn't have done this show without, CJ, I talked earlier about how she'd just go out there and work her ass off. She's one of the hardest working people and incredibly talented. She's actually right now in 4 Guys, 1 Groupon at the Hollywood Fringe. But she wants to help other people succeed as well. Everybody did. It was just a team in a way that you can't force. It's a team in a way that when you're being as open and honest with everybody ahead of time of this is our process, this is how much time we're going to have, this is what we're going to try to do with everybody. We want to take care of you. CJ was also our HR representative, where I clearly, with everybody I met the first day, I was like, I want to make sure this is open, this is transparent. I never want to make anybody uncomfortable, but if you ever do, I want to make sure you all know that there is somebody that you can talk to that's not like making sure that none of these problems that you kind of see spring up happen. And this was just such a great team.
Good. Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear it. What's your background as far as the craft and learning playwriting?
My craft, a lot of it was in college. So, as you said, I'm a classically trained actor at Webster Conservatory, or I think it's the Peter Sargent Conservatory now, who's a great guy who was the dean when we were there. That was at first, and when I was there, I wanted to do a minor in playwriting, but I didn't have enough time. There wasn't enough time in my schedule. So I took as many playwriting classes as I could, and I would just write, and just wrote and wrote and wrote. And then as an actor, that's also part of what I would do, is I would, the playwright, like as an actor, what am I supposed to do to serve the play versus what am I doing? How do I make it about me? Which we all do. I mean, it's the laughs there.
Hand of the truth.
You got to get it. So as the craft, it's really been a lot of trial and error. It's been being around these classics. It's been talking with other playwrights. And it's gone from that moment of I'm just writing plays to, oh, I'm being serious. And that took place when I got sober. It was when I was like, oh, I like telling stories. This is something I've always done kind of on my own. I'm good at it. Now's the time to get serious.
What were the things that you still use? What are the things you learned that you still use to this day going through that conservatory in playwriting?
It's okay to have unlikable characters. I remember one of our first days, and just because they're not good people doesn't mean they're unlikable. I think that's where people get in trouble. I remember early on, we all brought in something, and the teacher was like, there's no conflict, because these people are all, you don't want anybody to think bad of you because you would write a bad person. It's writing.
Well, we discussed that. I think it was Stephen Young. We talked about that because there were a few characters that he had written. And I'm like, do you find that people lash out at you because of things that your character's done? Like you're writing sensitive material, maybe to make a point or to, cover an issue. But you still got to cover it, and your characters have to go through the thing, but that's not you, and that shouldn't be reflective of you. So, that being said, I think there's two things that I think let's clarify, because I think there's having likable characters and characters you don't like. Yes. It's okay to have the unlikable characters, but you should always like your characters, if I'm not mistaken.
I always like I'm sorry. Let me clarify this.
Yeah, I just want to say it just for people that listening that I want to make sure that we differentiate the two, because I think there's a fine line between those two things.
Yeah, I love all my characters. As I said before, I never want to write a character that I don't want to play. Good, bad, small part, big part, whatever. And when you're doing sensitive stuff and topics and people are not great, I always go back to Shakespeare. I always go back to grace. Even in these terrible people, there's got to be something that's to like. I think about the guy in King Lear, and spoiler if you haven't read it or seen it, the guy who hangs Cordelia. Small little part. Guy stops him before he goes and says, here's this note, read it, do what's in the note. And he says, if I cannot draw a cart nor eat dried oats, if it be man's work, I'll do it. Small little part, one little line tells you everything you need to know about that character, and he goes and kills off one of the main characters. But there's such a life to him already. Bad stuff happens in the world, and that doesn't mean... Like, there are certain things that I think about George Carlin, and I think about George Carlin saying, you can talk about anything, but you also have to know how to talk about anything. I think that you can never punch down. And I think that happens with characters too. Like, if a character is just evil, what's the punching down? What's the point? What's the... it can get sticky sometimes.
Well, I mean, let's take Richard III. I mean,
Right.
I mean, isn't that how he does? Is punch down?
Yes, but he has been punched down his entire life.
So it's justified?
No, it's not justified.
Okay.
But it is but you understand where they're coming from. And that's like, yes, Richard III, and that's what he does, what Shakespeare does so beautifully. I'm actually working on a cutting of Othello right now. And Iago, same thing. Richard III and Iago are funny. And but that also makes us culpable in their actions. What you get with Shakespeare, what you get with theater that you don't get with film, is you get this. Is when Iago says, this will do something, he doesn't know what it's going to do, but he's looking at you like, do you know what it's going to do? All right, well, you're in with me because you're not going to tell him what's going to happen. And it makes us also no longer innocent bystanders, but we are bystanders. And we haven't done anything to stop what's about to happen. So when you talk about Richard III, right, from the very beginning of the play, or from the end of the previous play with Henry VI, Part 3, for those of you keeping score at home, Henry VI, Part 1, 2, 3 came before Henry IV, 1, 2, and Henry V. Star Wars logic. So at the end of Henry VI, Part 3, when he kills Henry, spoiler again, sorry, read more Shakespeare, kills Henry VI, and he does he's really looking at the audience and it's like, this is what, preview of coming attractions. And then Richard III, and he's got the speech of, now is the winter of our discontent. And the Ian McKellen movie does a great job of it. He's like, oh, he's giving his big speech. And then he goes to the bathroom and he's looking right at you. And and you are now a part of his plan. And likability doesn't mean you condone what the character is doing. And I think that's also part of where our line has to be. I think something that happens with Iago and Othello right now, which is difficult with Shakespeare. Shakespeare's always changing because you have to do it in the time that you're in. You have to acknowledge when it was done, and you have to do the play now. And you have to take everything in between, and then you hope people just follow the story. And Iago, I think the problem that you're seeing now is sometimes people like Iago too much. And he's really doing some terrible things to a lot of people. And it's okay to like him because he's going to make you laugh. But I think as long as your main goal in that is to have this culpability at the end of like, oh God, I didn't do anything. When in my life haven't I done anything? Because you're in a theater to be entertained, but also to be remembered, to remember things. I think Springsteen said it. He was like, nobody goes to a rock concert to learn anything, but we do go to be reminded of things. And I think sometimes that's hard with writing. I like to write about serious shit. Like, talk about this play. It's about suicide, or attempted suicide. I write about divorce. I write about alcoholism. I write about these things, but I also try to write them in such an entertaining, the characters use enough humor that we fall in love with them as they're going through this stuff.
And I think, who does that really well is Nikki Silver.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we talked about whether or not he likes all of his characters, and he does, but I mean, some of his characters are just rotten to the core.
Yeah.
But he still likes them.
100%. Think about that voice in the back of your head that says, oh, I wish that person would trip right now after they've done that thing. Sure,
yeah. And the thing with him as well, like that's another one that I when we talked, I worried that I'm like, how do you get away with this? But I'm like, the subject matter that he tackles and the way that he does it. I'm like, he had posted something a while back saying, oh, this last play only covered three trigger warnings. I must be falling behind or something like that, or I'm not doing a very good job or something like that. Because he loves to cross the line, and I think that there's some people that can get away with it because they know how.
Yeah, I don't think I'm one of those people that can do that. I think when I talk about these things, though, I think Sorkin said it. I'm just quoting everybody now. Know what pitch you can swing at. And like if you get this idea, and that's what happens with me sometimes when I write, or I'll start a couple ideas and I'll only get a little bit into it. I'm like, and it just kind of fizzles out. And I think it's a good idea, or there's more to it, and I'm not ready yet, or something hasn't fallen in yet, and it just kind of goes back in the hopper. It's just not a pitch to swing at that moment. Versus when future tripping happened, idea came in as like, oh no, I'm going to connect with this one, and just off to the races. I think to be able to trust that feeling also of why am I not in flow right now while I'm doing this? And sometimes that is subject matter. Sometimes that's characters. Sometimes it's all these things. Like there are plays that I know, there are topics that I am not well-versed enough to tackle responsibly.
Such as what? What would you stay away from? What is like that's not my territory?
It's funny.
Not to interrupt. I'm sorry. I'll give you a prime example.
Please.
There was a play that I wanted to write in college, and it was a confession box between a priest and a stripper.
Okay.
And this was the premise. But the twist is it wasn't the actual confession box. It was the private stripping room.
Okay.
Where the priest is actually there.
That's a good concept.
But my professor was like, no, you can't write that. You don't know enough about Catholicism. I'm like, I can research, first of all, and that may not necessarily be what my play's about.
Yeah.
It can have elements of it, but to be told that you can't write that because you don't know, which is not the same as like, I'm not going to write that because I don't feel that I know enough. That's not the same. But so going back.
No, and that's funny because it's in my head, I'm like, well, yeah, I probably know enough about Catholicism. I don't know enough about the ins and outs of an everyday life of a sex worker, of a stripper, of somebody of that. I would have to do more research, and I don't know if that's a rabbit hole that I personally would want to go. But like talking about that, and that's okay.
It could be a lot of fun.
It could be a lot of fun. You're right. There's no judgment coming out of this either. I also want to make sure that. But what of that story? There are a lot of like I just saw Tambo and Bones, and it was fantastic at the Center Theater Group. It was in their smaller space. It's an incredibly written play, but it's also a play that's like, I do not have the life experience. I do not have the knowledge. I could never, and it starts as a minstrel show, and it goes through hip hop and rap into the future. And I was just blown away by it. And I loved it. I loved it so much. And it's also one of those things where you're in the space with the actors. We're not doing a movie. We're not doing fourth wall. You're there. And I just loved the way that it was performed. I loved the way that it was written, directed, all these things. But I also 100% went, I'm 100% okay with it too. Of like, that's an amazing piece of work.
Well, I think it's important as writers to not get discouraged. I mean, I think there's things that people can write or do write. I don't think you can compare yourself to them just because they can.
Yes.
So my question to you in that regard is, how layered do you get? How many layers deep do you go, or do you kind of keep it not surfacey, but how complex do you make your plays where there's a lot of circling back and there's a lot of metaphor and symbolism and this is that, or do you let the audience just take it as it is, or is everything that you write intentional?
So after Future Tripping opened, I had a friend call me, and he talked for 10 minutes about it, just straight. Like we talked for a while about it, but he just went, and I loved it because there were things that he noticed that I did on purpose, and there were things that he noticed that I was like, well, I didn't put that in there, but I'm glad that that's what you got out of that. Because my experience is different than your experience. I write what I hope are universal enough characters because they're so specific. My characters are incredibly specific. Because that's what I love watching characters. So that's where I go deep on. I go on their life and what their journey is, and those things. Some of the other things are, for me, with my writing, is about, so these bigger themes are more about that in a human being versus kind of these other, and theater does it. Theater can do big motifs and things in a way that I think other mediums can't.
Let's talk about character then.
Yeah.
If you go, if that's your focus, your forte, and we make them complex, you really go deep into that and detailed. Talk about that. How detailed do you go? What steps do you take? And how do you implement those aspects into your writing, into a piece?
It always starts with, how do I... How does it start? And that's what I love about these conversations too, is because it really makes you have to go, like, I don't always think about this stuff when I sit down at the computer, but when we talk about it and we suss it out, I'm like, oh, that is what I do. Okay. And that either helps me go, I can double down on that, make it stronger, or I can change my ways. Right. With character, it's funny. I remember when I first started to do crummy things to my characters because the story needed it.
Example.
I wrote a play called One Way Trip, and it was the one that was apparently have a thing with trip in the title. But it was about people going to Mars on a one-way training to go to Mars. And the whole play is about the training. And I didn't quite know how it was going to end. And I didn't know I was going to fall in love with my characters the way I did. Because I kind of knew how it was going to end, but I didn't realize that on the journey, on the way there, I was going to feel horrible for them for the big moment that comes. There's part of me that was like, I wanted to get produced still, because it's a small play, it's a really small cast and a small set and all this stuff. So thinking about doing it again out here in LA. But there was a big moment where I was like, oh my God, people are gonna hate me for what I do to this one character in particular. And it's, once again, I'm the playwright, so it's my fault, but the story makes it. Like, that's the right choice. Not a happy ending isn't necessarily the best ending. A right ending is the happiest ending. And so by doing that with character, I will pull from myself. I'll pull from, like, I'll take little pieces of myself in all of my characters. My partner sometimes is like, is this character you? Is this character you? Or is this character? It's like, well, they're all.
I was going to say, aren't they all?
They're all a little bit of me. But then I give them enough that they can go off and go on their own. I'm like, okay, well, if that's this little piece coming through. And also making sure that nobody's voice is the same. And it could be easy to do that with witty banter of like, oh, they're all really smart, but they got to have different voices.
You're the second person who's brought this up, the last episode that just dropped. Cool. So how do you achieve that? Paul has his way. Yep. Paul Braverman has his way. What's yours to make your character sound distinct?
I think that's also acting training in me. That's, okay, this character is different, so if I'm going to be doing that, I need to... If I was playing this part versus this part, where do they lead? What's their pace? Where's the conflict? And a lot of times where that conflict between the two characters also helps me find how their voice is different. Background, what their job is, like all of these things, that text analysis that we do as actors, of like kind of gathering all whatever's in the script about them, helps me to make sure that their voice is distinct and different. And also, one of the best things that you can do as a writer is be in the world. I've lived all over the country. I was born in Chicago. We moved to Pittsburgh when I was a kid. Then we moved to San Francisco, and then we moved to Kansas City, and then I went to college in St. Louis, and then I moved to New York, but I worked in Minnesota for 7 summers, and then I moved out here. My my partner and I, we go on big road trips where we'll like go through the plains, we'll do these things, and these are all these people and all of these stories go in there. And a lot of times I don't remember some of the stuff until I'm like, oh, this character was kind of fun. Or I'll write stuff down hoping that later I'll write a story out of it. But these little bits and pieces come out and they help create the voice of that character too.
You mentioned conflict. Mm-hmm. How do you approach conflict when you write? Do you know do you already know ahead of time in the scene when you start it? Or do you figure it out as you start the dialogue?
I do both. So sometimes it's a play I wrote, the one that you talked about as a finalist. We did a reading of it virtually through Great River Shakespeare Festival. It's called Is Not That Strange. And that started as a one act. It was, I thought I was just going to write this 20-page one act of a couple rehearsing Much Ado About Nothing, but they've been divorced and this is the first time they've seen each other for a long time. So that was the idea. So already the conflict is there, right? How it comes out then is the actor improver in me of like, all right, just kind of going with the flow of what they would say. And then when do you cross the line? And when is it the oops, ouch? And when is it the I meant to hurt you there, ouch? So something like that is character improv. Something like future tripping where you accidentally murder yourself and then all the conflict kind of lines up in front of you of like, okay, what are the questions of what do you do with the body? Is it a crime? If you've actually murdered yourself, but it's from the future, like kind of going through that. And then that play is really about a daughter and a father reconciling. So these two conflicts are already just bouncing against each other. So then if you're in one too long, you can kind of bounce back to the other one and back and forth and back and forth. But the conflict is also where the comedy comes from. Because, I mean, not always, but if you love all of your characters, I'm going to not use the royal we, I'm going to say me. If I don't know what you do or any other writers who are watching this do, when I have characters that I love, they're all the bad guy and they're all the good guy. You're somebody else's bad guy. And in trying to do that, in trying to make sure that we see everybody. So you talk about Richard III. Yeah, he's doing lots of terrible things, but we understand him. We can see grace a little bit. We can see that change a little bit. I always like to start a conversation and end it in hope. And so with that conflict, I always try to see how that can be resolved in the best way. Once again, not necessarily a happy way, but an accountability way in different types of paths like that.
So going back,
yeah,
because we went down a rabbit hole, rightfully so.
Lovely conversation. Thank you for having me. I'm having so much fun.
So the one thing I do want to touch base on, because I want to know tricks and habits,
yeah,
and tools that you've used. So I want to go back to the question, are there things that you learned in your writing classes that you still use to this day?
The scene can be shorter. Theater and film are very different in that path. I used to write really long. As I talked about, 20 pages, and sometimes that's the same two characters, and in plays that's hard, but they can always be shorter. So that's something that I've learned early on. I talked about the characters thing, is you can have unlikable characters. Don't worry, we know it's not you. There's always going to, and it's funny, in a lot of plays you'll see the person's like thesis statement. You're like, oh, that's the playwright's thesis statement, but that's not what they're saying. What are some other things that I learned? want is always, when in doubt, try to find the want. It's simple. And I mean, when we talk about log lines, which is, if it's a way to boil down your script when you're trying to sell it to somebody of like, hey, this is the story. And they're frustrating because we're like, if I knew that, I wouldn't have written 100 pages about it. Like, read the 100 pages rather than, that can help cut through the weeds of all these different things that you want to talk about. I used to have the problem where I wanted to write about everything in the play because I didn't know if I would have another play in me. So I was like, well, I got to talk about this, I got to talk about that. And it's a jumbled mess. So really knowing that this is what I want to talk about. This is the theme of this play. I heard somebody write about it as you're not killing your darlings, you're just cryogenically freezing them. You're going to take them out, you're going to put them in something else. Maybe you'll use them later, but they're not gone. And that helps what characters want can help you get through the woods of, how do I get out of this scene? And if you're worried about how to get out of the scene, end the scene. Just end it, go on. And then whatever you think is logically happening next, that's happened to them. Sometimes, and if not, you'll figure out what the scene is. Something else that if you're stuck, write something else. If you're stuck, go for a walk. Don't look at your phone, which I have trouble with. I mean, we're writing at a computer. The internet's right there. Yep. It's like I could just easily, tips and tricks also for this stuff. I know that you also talk about short stage directions. You're seeing this kind of weird world where stage directions are now, like, you're getting back to the Eugene O'Neill, like, here's my page upon page of stage directions.
Yeah.
And that's fine, I think, if you're also directing it to kind of give you ideas there. But I like to give enough that it sparks the imagination, or I use pauses and beats and stuff like dialogue. Like, I'll put beat in the musical aspect of it in my head, of like, I'll hear it, and that beat is there on purpose.
Right, sure.
But I try not to be like, this is what you're doing during that beat.
No, of course. And the one that the one that I use a lot in this particular play is either a moment, silence, no response. Whether or not that's effective, I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't read through this yet. I'm a little nervous. But hopefully it's effective.
I think it is. 100% it is. And once again, being an actor and a writer, write what works for you. Because it's going to work for other actors. And that's also something I try to remember as I'm writing is I also want that. I know some people don't. I know some people, like, what's the story about Christopher Walken? He goes through and he erases all of the punctuation. But I personally want that because I want to serve the writer. And in auditions, too, I want to go in and be like, there are so many different ways to play a scene. I also kind of want to know what is being asked of for this scene. And I can be an artist in the sandbox, but let me know what the sandbox is.
Let me get that on. I think that stage directions are a little bit of a guideline as well. That's how somebody else, one of the players I talked to, did it as guidelines. I think that for beginning playwrights, the thing that I've noticed that they do is they will do certain things like takes a drink. That, walking away from somebody in the middle of a conversation, that's intentional.
But I'll say takes a drink if that's going to be a beat or a joke, or like by the end of it, that person's going to have to pee. Sometimes I'll put that in with like liquor.
Sure.
Like that's the things, but yeah, keep going.
So, well, I think that, well, I mean, let's go on that note as well. If you want to talk about liquor, we can touch base on Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. It's intentional. Those drinks are written in there.
Oh boy.
For a reason.
To know how drunk they're getting throughout the night.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I've heard stories about performances or productions that have tried to actually go through and I don't know if they've, so.
No.
There is so I do want to touch one thing because it's come up a lot. So how much do you implement your experience with both Shakespeare festivals in your writing? Because it seems like you do. And what other aspects? Because it seems like you always draw upon with character maybe, and what other aspects of Shakespeare do you use?
I love Shakespeare. And it's funny because I was in those festivals for so long that when I kind of, after we did Hamlet, I was like, I'm going to take a break from kind of going anywhere near that. But somehow there'd always be a quote that snuck its way in.
It's intimidating. I was assigned a scene in an acting class once from Hamlet between him and Gertrude. And
And
it was just so intimidating. I couldn't get it memorized. I'm like, I don't think I can act anymore. I almost threw it all. I almost threw it in.
Well, it's amazing. So what happened with that too? Also, I'll just keep throwing
why not?
More connection words in there. No, I talked about. I mentioned it briefly, but talked about being sober. And part of that story, there's a lot of Hamlet. There's a lot of sobriety in Hamlet, in a weird way. So I was like, okay, what if Hamlet is everything is coming through Horatio's point of view? Because at the very end of the play, he says, "Let me speak to the yet unknowing world." He said, "I'm going to go tell the story." So maybe this is one of the first times that he's gone out and told the story. And it all took place in a bar. And it was only like 7 actors. Horatio and Hamlet and Gertrude and Claudius didn't double. Everybody else did. Because it was just going through Horatio's mind. So we cut a lot of it out. Because if it's only stuff that Horatio knows, a lot of the play gone. And in being able to do... So then, as we're doing that, going through my own sobriety stuff, Hamlet has a drinking problem. And it's only getting worse with the grief. And it's getting worse throughout the entire play. And the first time that I understood to be or not to be, the actual sense of to be or not to be, I was assigned it in college. My professor, and I did all the text work, and I knew what all the words meant, and knowing what the words mean is different than understanding it. And my professor in college, who I still talk to today, and he's a great actor too, but he was like, I liked watching you beat your head against the wall. It's like, it was fun for me to watch.
Was that a literal sense or
no?
Metaphorical?
No, it was a metaphorical
just making sure.
thing. Because I think I was a little overly confident, younger, all these things. I've humbled a lot in my life because I think a lot of us are in this. It's not just me. We're a little egotistical when we're younger. We think we know everything, and there's a lot to learn still. Even now, like we're talking about this, and I'm learning from you all these things. And
likewise, I learned something new every episode that we record this. I'm like, oh man, implementing is another thing, but learning it is.
Yes, exactly. So I was in a meeting, and I was like 3 weeks sober, and it was the first time that there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so really hit with me. There was the first time that I understood how somebody could go from I've got it. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go do this plan. And the next time you see him, he is contemplating suicide. And that was the first time I went, oh, that outward show and that's very easy to do that. And so I took my experience with it and made it this. And so when he comes back from England, it's the first time he's been sober in a while. And he's there is this little bit of there's a divinity that shapes our ends, like there's the higher power. He's trying to make amends to some of the people. Doesn't do a very good job of it because brain's still a little, like when he jumps into the grave with Ophelia. Like Ophelia is the tragedy of that play too. Other people get involved, she got thrown involved. So there's this collateral damage. There is this inability to, he can't survive this play. Like in the rules of kind of tragedy and comedy and what his collateral damage has done, it's tough for him to survive, particularly today. But he does need to make things right, and that's kind of where it ends up. And so that was kind of the theme of that. So by understanding, so now when I do, I'm sorry, drinking that water. Now when I do get stuck on a play or a film or a TV show or something that I'm working on, I sometimes will go back and I'll just kind of relive that process with a different play. Shakespeare stuff is all there, and a lot of it's great. But if I'm like, okay, if I'm just gonna, I had a friend who goes, but why was it in there? Shakespeare wanted it in there for a reason. I'm like, yes, he did. And other actors made a book and said, this is the play. I'm not sacred with his text in the way that I'm also not sacred with my stuff. If people want to try other things, and then I'll cut down and edit a play and kind of direct it towards a theme. Hamlet's got so many different themes, you could make it about all these different things. A lot of Shakespeare productions, you'll be like, this is what we're focusing on. And if it doesn't, kind of follow that. So that helps me sometimes focus on what is essential to a story. There can be so much great stuff there. So that has helped me as a writer with editing Shakespeare. As an actor acting Shakespeare and then doing all this, punctuation. That's why I love punctuation. Because I was trained on this is where, so if I'm writing and I'm writing like music, I put that comma there for a reason. I put that dash there for a reason. I always kind of put like rules of engagement at the beginning of like, this is what these things mean, just so an actor can look at it and go. Because that's also, I want an actor to just feel free to act.
You mentioned what makes a story. What makes a story?
What makes a story?
What makes a story in your mind?
I mentioned what makes a story.
Yeah, the elements of a story, or that's what
the essential part of the story. Yeah.
What is the essential part of a story?
Oh, I think it depends who's telling the story and what story it is. I think about we when I was in Utah, when we had to kind of switch this, somebody was telling us a joke, and I think it's an old Red Fox joke he was telling me, and it's just a build. And it's such a funny build. And it's like, ate the fly to catch the thing, like it's one of those jokes where it just kind of keeps going and going and going. And he delivered it so well that, I mean, that story is, what makes that story is how far can it go? How ridiculous can you get with it? Versus what makes a story, when I'm watching a play, what makes a story is, for me, personally, don't send them your angry letters and say this is gospel. For me, what I need to connect with someone, and that's just me personally. That's what I love seeing, and it doesn't have to be somebody that I am or relate to. It has to be somebody like, I want to follow that person. I want to follow that story or that person wherever they're going, and I want to know what's going to happen to them. That's for me, but there's so many.
Is there a way to achieve that?
On stage?
In writing?
In writing? Yeah. And I think that's the big thing to remember too with playwriting is it's not just on the page. It's gotta be you and me, flesh and blood in a room doing the talking. What theater can do and what Shakespeare helps with is the ability to be with someone when they're going through it. I saw Frost Nixon at the St. Louis Rep, and then I saw the movie later. And the movie's good. But in the play, when Nixon's losing it at the end, you're in the room watching the guy squirm and do the thing.
Remind me, is this Sorkin?
This was Frost Nixon was not David Hare, but it was another kind of political.
Not Mamet. Right. Is it Mamet?
No, I don't think it's Mamet either. Sorry, we'll look it up.
It's not Stoppard.
It's not Stoppard either. Yeah, he was English though, whoever it was. But the point is, you're watching Nixon flip and say, "I did it." When the president does it, it isn't illegal. And to be in the room and have everybody go, "Oh," to be able to be or not to be, or Rogue and Peasant Slave, or Iago tell you, I hate the Moor. I'm gonna do this stuff. To lose that. We're empathetic creatures, I think. Some of us might not seem like it, but I think there's a little bit of, at least
we're supposed to be.
Supposed to be. There's a little bit of empathy in everybody, and I think that's why stories help us. But when you watch people, there's studies about the audience's heartbeat lining up and their breathing lining up. And when an actor holds their breath, the audience holds their breath. That you don't get anywhere else. So when you're writing, that's part of the act as well. When you're writing playwriting, is what you and I see on our computer screens when it's just us and we're doing everything in our head in the dream world. To be able to translate that, 100% I think it's possible to translate that and to be able to follow character and follow actors, and know that either somebody's going to be okay or we're not going to be okay. That's also a tough story to tell right now.
Do you address the audience in your pieces?
Some of them. I'm getting more back into that kind of. There are playwrights who do this so well. Not like contemporary playwrights are like, yeah, we're in the room together. There's another place that I work for, another Shakespeare. It's called Backroom Shakespeare Project, where they do. It's called serious actors, one rehearsal, no directors in a bar. And so you
interesting.
You do the play. You read through the play once. Everybody goes home for like 3 weeks. You go do one rehearsal in the bar. That's really for fighting and entrances and exits and things like that. And then you do the show on the day of. And the theory behind it, the original theory, like they even wrote like a manifesto and everything in it. There's a lot of good stuff in it. But it's not suspension of disbelief, but I think they called it actualism. This idea that you are creating a new reality. The show is happening right here. You are a part of it. I'm going to talk to you. If a siren goes by, I'm not ignoring the siren. Particularly if it can help me with my thing.
Sure.
And there's a part of me that wants to get back into that. But when I direct right now in my stuff already to this point, when I'm talking to the audience, usually there's a device, like a one-way trip, they're talking to a camera, kind of like a personal, like this right now. The is not that strange. She's addressing the theater audience, but like they're her theater and talking to you all like that. But yeah, we didn't have any of it in Future Tripping, which felt very much more of you were peering in on something that maybe you shouldn't have. And I think sometimes it helps when you're talking about something like suicide to kind of also have that kind of bar to make sure that when you're talking, we earlier were talking about topics and things like that and trigger warnings and things like that. I don't, unlike Nikki Silver, who kind of loves poking, there are certain stories that I want to make sure people understand it's okay to talk about suicide.
Sure.
I want to make sure that we can laugh about suicide because a lot of us have had those thoughts. And if we can normalize laughing about it and talking about it, we will have more conversations about it. And then we will also not lean into that choice as much.
Good point. You kind of talked about it with production. Is there anything about playwriting that you wished you would have known, like right off the bat, that was like your biggest, like, I wish I would have known that when I first started? Like a late discovery or anything like that?
Yeah. Get your crew. Get a good group of people who will, you talked about before, who won't BS you. Get people who you can trust to tell you the truth and share it. Early on, I wasn't going to share any of this stuff with anybody. I was like, once it gets made, then I will share it with people. Or once it's ready. But in these early stages, I found that that's the best way to know if you're on the right track of, this connects with me. Is it connecting with you? If it's not connecting with you, why isn't it connecting with you? Because not everything's going to connect with everybody. But if you have not just one person, if you have a group of people that you can trust, and you kind of know a lot of them have different tastes, that's sharing your work is one of the best things I've learned to do. I used to be afraid of people stealing my work. And then I realized that's a lot. It happens, but sometimes it's more of a plot point in a movie or a TV show than it is people actually wanting to steal you, if they're people you trust.
Sure. No, 100%. Yeah. I think, and I also find that people, most of the time, I'd like to give people the benefit of the doubt that they're too busy working on their own stuff to worry about stealing yours.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think it'd be the same story either way. What are you working on now? What's next?
So there are 2 plays that I'm working on right now. One is very personal that I don't know if I'm going to talk about it yet.
Aren't they all?
Yeah, they're all very personal, but this one, it's, I don't know if you've talked about this with other people. When we take from our lives so much, sometimes, and Lamont talks about that libel thing, but I'm not libeling anybody, but
got it. Yes, sure.
When you take stuff from life and things like that, sometimes people will see themselves and it's not them, but it's very easy for somebody to think it is them. There's something right now that I'm working on that I'm like, how do I tell this story while taking care of people that I love? That's the big thing. And then there's another one that I'm working on that is, it's also exciting. It's about, it's kind of like Network, but about climate change. And it's one of those things that I do want to have that kind of audience interaction with it, of how do you translate that line by being in the room with the person doing the thing and getting those audience questions in there. And then I'm writing pilots and screenplays and things like that too.
Nice. And then where can people find your work?
Where can people find my work? They can find it on www.brianjeanwhite.com, which I think is also where you found it.
It's one of the places.
It is one of the places. I've got an Instagram at Brian Jean White. I'm on Twitter at Brian Jean Writes. Their Backroom Shakespeare Project, Los Angeles. We just did Midsummer. I think we're working on a Taming of the Shrew and a Much Ado About Nothing. Ensemble Shakespeare Theatre they do a monthly show called What You Will. That's kind of a take on Shakespeare. It's a kind of a conversation with his work. If you're in Minnesota, the Great River Shakespeare Festival is playing right now. And you can see the African Company Presents Richard III, which I'm going up there to see next week, and I'm looking forward to it. My friend Corey Allen directed it, and it looks amazing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thanks for coming on the Playwright Spotlight.
Thank you. I hope I didn't blather too much. I feel like I was just talking the whole time, but that's a podcast, right? That's what we do.
That's exactly what this is about. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for watching this episode of the Playwright Spotlight. Again, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, even if it's just to say hi or to talk about your favorite playwright or the biggest aspects or issues that you might have as a playwright. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, and until we see each other again, keep writing.